So there's a miscellaneous category of funk beats you've definitely heard. But that nobody's really talking about. But it's definitely one you should have in your arsenal. And if you've seen drummers like Adam Deitch and Chris Dave play stuff like this, not to mention funky ride cymbal bell patterns, and wondered, how do I get that in my playing? This is the beginning of the answer. It's something I call funk claves. But I'm not completely out in left field with that name, as recent podcast guest Stanton Moore outlines.
So once things get to New Orleans, things developed as Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-New Orleans.
But nobody's really teaching it as a thing. Online, at least. You got your halftime shuffles. You got your funky drummer continuous 16ths. But what exactly is going on here? Well, I'm here to help. My name is Nate, and people call me the 80-20 drummer. And today, we're going to give you an easy system to start to get these beats into your playing so you have that vibe you can go for. Because sometimes what you need isn't another lick or chop. It's a way to keep things in the groove, but break it up a little. Today on 80-20, Funky Claves, the funk beat nobody's talking about. Stay tuned. Folks, today's video is brought to you by me, the 80-20 drummer. If you'd like a completely free transcription of basically all the beats I play in this video, just click the link below the player and tell us where to send it. That's it, it's free. Now on with the lesson. Let's start with the basics. What's a drum beat? That basic. At bottom, a lot of modern drum beats cash out to this. Just kick, snare, kick, snare. So what differentiates funk from other styles? Well, among a million other things, rock beats tend to be more eighth note oriented, like this. And funk beats tend to bring out the 16ths a little more. Though there are tons of funk beats in rock, and a bunch of things that break this rule. But when we talk about funk, generally we're talking about this style of beat. And there are a bunch of standard ways to subdivide this on the hats or on the cymbal. One classic way is the lead hand playing all the 16ths. Another variation is the one-andas, the pattern I call da-da-das. So it's into this context that we'll drop clave funk beats. Basically, it's something else to do with the lead hand, which can also influence what the other limbs play. One of the most famous drummers for playing this way is David Garibaldi. Check out as he switches from a half-note bass groove during the chorus of this song to a more syncopated beat when the sax solo starts. We don't have to do everything Garibaldi's doing right off the bat. We can start way simpler. Quick aside for what's a clave even, and why am I using that word? Originally in Afro-Cuban music, the clave was a 2-bar pattern that corresponded with a set of norms for drum parts, melodies, montunos, that part of the song where the piano plays octaves, and even improvisation. A lot of Afro-Latin music was organized around dance, so if a song was in clave, composers and musicians tried not to deviate from that 2-bar pattern. Even going so far as to write 3 or 5-bar phrases if, for instance, the bridge of a song was oriented differently to clave than the verse, as Mongo Santa Maria did in Afro Blue. I say all of this to orient us so we can now use a much looser definition of clave. As I'm using it here, it basically means any syncopated pattern. But here's the thing, if you study the roots of modern music, funk, jazz, blues, and even rock, All had its origin in New Orleans, where, as Stanton Moore tells us, clave from the Caribbean was exerting subtle influence on a lot of stuff.
Through the horrific practices of slavery, with forced migration of slavery coming from Africa through Brazil, through Cuba, through New Orleans. So once things get to New Orleans, things developed as Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-New Orleans.
So my conspiracy theory is these funk claves, though it's a looser definition of the word, do have medium distant ancestry from Afro-Latin music. A CK, there's still some actual clave in there. Have I put you to sleep yet? Let's look at some examples of how to actually do these on the drums. The first clave I want to look at is actually literally a 2/3 son clave. Son, a style of music that has its roots in early 19th century Cuba, uses this clave. So we're going to lift that rhythm and just play it on the hats with the lead hand. Next, we're going to add a simple backbeat underneath it. I want to see, as long as you've got good pocket, this makes an interesting groove. But now, let's spice it up a little. Let's isolate the lead hand again. Now, instead of just playing the clave notes, I'm going to play some ghost notes with the same hand, but still accent the clave as if I were playing this on a cowbell. Now we'll add in the backbeat again. With this pattern, we can already move the lead hand to the ride cymbal and play the accents on the bell. Occasionally, we can play the hats on eighths with the foot. But let's come back to the hats. The next thing we can do to embellish is to vary the kick pattern to phrase with and against the clave and allow some ghost notes in the snare. We can move this to the ride cymbal again. Many directions we can go, but before we murdered this out too much, let's come back to do another classic clave I'm lifting from Otis McDonald. This time, we'll speed through the process. Clave in the hats, backbeat with the kick and snare. Then vary the kick and add ghost notes as necessary to make it maximum funky. Then move the lead hand to the ride cymbal bell. Final example. Let's take this Chris Dave beat from Kenny Garrett's Happy People. When we hear Chris play this, there's a lot going on. Well, let's start basic. Clave in the hats, basic beat. Make the kick drum do what we want. Lead hand to the ride. Now, let's toss in those embellishments Chris is doing. Which brings us to big chapter 2. With it. I want to make a video about Dallas drummers and Houston drummers soon, but we hear Chris Dave, who's from Houston, doing a lot of embellishment using toms or bongos. And drummers like Mike Mitchell and Cleon Edwards, both from Dallas, also sometimes use bongos on the kick drum. And other drummers like Jarvis Yoakley are adopting this too. Anyway, if we strip away all the layers of embellishment, we're essentially playing funk claves with the lead hand, and then migrating the lead hand, and sometimes the rimshot hand, to other surfaces. So if we take our happy people beat and remove all the other surfaces, that's a funk clave beat. Same with the Otis McDonald Keep It Sexy, only in the opposite direction. Just orchestrate and there are a lot of possibilities. But there are two directions we still haven't gone. First, creating our own claves in real time. And finally, migrating the snare pattern to produce stuff like David Garibaldi does. I've got a video on something I call switching exercises, which I'll link to here. But it's useful to start on the toms. We're going to play two stickings. The first is this. And the second is this. We can mix and match these to make interesting phrases like this. I like to play around the toms for melody. Now for the Tim and Eric head exploding meme. We're going to make those same shapes on the hi-hats. Next, we're going to add a backbeat and do a little funky kick drum. Shades of gray here. You may have to fudge the sticking a little, or cheat with the clave to fit the backbeat in. That's okay. This is not a coordination exercise. It's a funky exercise. Now, the midterm. And you just improvise claves as if you were making those phrases on the toms with this backbeat structure. Now, the final. What if we migrated the snare? Back to the toms, we're skipping over basically 6 months of material I do with my students here, because it's one thing to just copy a transcription, like you can get for free by clicking below the player and telling us where to send it, but it's another to improvise your own in the moment. But we go back to the toms, and now we allow ourselves a few more degrees of freedom. We can add kick drum notes in before accents, and we can also play rim shots on either hand where they fall conveniently. If you imagine moving that back to the hats and snare, you now get something like this. Which, I think, is a decent approximation of Garibaldi. From there, incorporating orchestration around the toms becomes almost trivial. Does this make sense to you guys? In a lot of these lessons, you'll notice me making these kind of scaffold exercises, where I'm relating something you can already do, then bridging off that, then connecting it up, and eventually it's getting close to something you're watching a great drummer do. If you're wondering why don't you just copy exactly what they're doing, that's also a valid way, but that's like learning to speak only by reading books. You want to be able to improvise your own ideas, not just copy, and there are faster ways to get there than just copying what others did and waiting for it to incept you.
you get the gig.
Anyway, did we do a thing here, you guys? Quick reminder that if you'd like a complete transcription of all this stuff, you can get it by clicking below the player and telling us where to send it on the next page. Dudes, it's been real. Always enjoy these. See you again real soon for another lesson of the week.